Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode, we're talking about the 2018 NFL Scouting Combine, specifically offensive line analytics. So today's video is going to go over a lot of different terms and different sort of analytical things that you probably are not very familiar with. All terms and definitions are going to be in the description, so if there's anything that you're not familiar with that I'm talking about in this video, you can just go there to kind of get a brief sort of explanation. But there's three main metrics I'm going to be talking about in today's video that I think you should understand what they are and why they matter. First off is the explosive lower body strength score, or EXP as shown in the chart here. EXP essentially takes the vertical jump and the broad jump measured against mass density to determine how explosive an offensive lineman is. It really has nothing to do with speed. It's really about how powerful these players are in terms of their lower body strength. And based on many different studies, and I'll actually leave a study in the description, both those drills, the vertical and the broad jump, are essentially measuring muscles, hip muscles, ankle muscles, so basically lower body strength muscles is essentially what that drill measures. And when it comes to the players in the class, and I'll just go position by position, there were some players who didn't really do well in terms of explosive lower body strength. Joe, and a lot of them were offensive tackles, by the way. Joe Noteboom from TCU, Brian O'Neill from Pittsburgh, Taylor Hearn from Clemson, Greg Senat from Wagner, and Alex Kappa from Humboldt State, Orlando Brown, who is, of course, had a bad combine in general, and then, of course, Mike McGlinchey in terms of the offensive tackles. The reason why it matters at offensive tackle is players that typically do really poorly in explosive lower body strength scores are players that get a bad rap, but they're kind of out of position, because the offensive tackle position in general, you want explosive athletes at that position, because when you're talking about that position, you're talking about a guy that has to explode out of his stance and match the explosiveness of an edge rusher. And when you don't have the explosiveness in your lower body to match the explosiveness of an edge rusher, that's where you see those sacks at times where they're just not able to recover, where they're not able to, as a lot of people say, oh, he struggles with speed or he struggles with explosiveness. A lot of times offensive tackles who struggle with speed and struggle with explosiveness struggle with it because they're not explosive enough in terms of their lower half. Examples of guys that weren't that great in terms of explosive lower body strength, Matt Khalil. This is actually Matt Khalil's data right here, just in terms of his EXP score. And of course, Jason Smith, who's by far considered one of the biggest busts at least in terms of offensive linemen in the last couple years. He definitely ran fast and he was flexible, but that explosive lower body strength score was just way too low. So even though guys like Brian O'Neill and Joe Noteboom might be guys that people hype up after the combine saying, oh, look how fast they are, look how flexible they are, when you look at the explosive lower body strength score with these guys, they look more like Matt Khalil and Jason Smith than they do high quality NFL players with really great speed and great flexibility. So for that reason, those are just the big red flag guys that I just wanted to point out to you for the most part when it comes to EXP at that position. Other positions that kind of didn't do well in terms of EXP, Nebraska, Nick Gates at offensive guard, Sam Jones from Arizona State, and Mason Cole from Michigan is also the center that didn't really do well in terms of explosive lower body strength. Now, interior offensive linemen don't typically have to perform extremely well in terms of this particular metric. However, you do want to see above averageness. You do want to see at least, you want them to hit a certain number, especially when you're talking about high quality outcomes. So when it comes to interior offensive linemen, those are just guys that failed a crucial metric that really determines whether or not they might become a high-quality interior offensive lineman or not becoming a high-quality interior offensive lineman. So that's just the two guys I wanted to explain in terms of that. Next up, we have the infamous speed score. The speed score, the score that everybody says doesn't matter, the 40-yard dash of the offensive line position. The 40-yard dash does matter. The 40-yard dash measures a trait like any other trait. How fast offensive lineman is can largely determine scheme fit a lot of times. Is this guy fast enough? to get out in space and get onto a linebacker. Some offensive linemen are not fast enough to do that. Certain schemes demand their offensive linemen to be able to do those types of things, and that's where the 40-yard dash in a lot of ways looks to. It's not necessarily the end-all be-all in terms of total high-qualityness of an offensive lineman, but if you're running a power scheme, you need your offensive lineman to be fast enough to get out in space and hit people. And whatever scheme you're doing, you want them to be fast enough to get out in space and get on a linebacker, or at least make up some ground as an offensive lineman. And that score, the speed score, is basically mass density with the 40-yard dash measured in. So it's essentially measuring how fast they are for their size is essentially what the speed score is doing. And in terms of major players who failed or didn't do well in terms of the speed score, Jamil Dimby from Maine is one of those guys. Brandon Parker from North Carolina A&T. Casey McDermott from Miami, Florida are the offensive tackles that didn't really do well in terms of the speed score. When it comes to offensive tackles in general, you want them to be above average speed. More so than any other position, the offensive tackle position is one of those positions where you want them to run fast. Offensive guard, you can get away with that. Offensive center, you can get away with not being the fastest guy. But if you're playing offensive tackle, you need to be above average in terms of your speed, and those guys weren't really above average. And then, of course, when we get to the interior offensive linemen, the only guys who kind of didn't really do that well in terms of the speed score 100% was Sean Welsh from Iowa, the Utah guard as well. Didn't really do well in terms of that metric. And those are just the two main ones I just wanted to point out, is that those are guys that even for interior offensive linemen, they ran a very, very low speed score. So those are guys that I would kind of worry about in terms of the potential to be a long-term starter, or at least a high-quality starter, is very much kind of out of the cards for those guys based on their speed score. And then the final thing we're going to talk about is the flexibility score, or the balance score. The balance score essentially takes into account things like the short shuttle and three-cone measured against mass density. Those drills in particular, the short shuttle and three-cone, players who have really great core strength and great balance are able to go through those drills a lot faster than other players. Which is why, and when you're talking about offensive linemen, you want them to be balanced. You want them to have balance. You want them to be able to stay on their feet and do those other types of things. One common example I always throw out there is Russell Bodine's one of those guys that was explosive, fast, and did terrible in terms of the balance drills, the agility drills. And you can see on tape that he's one of those guys that just ends up on the ground way too much because he's just not flexible enough or has a great amount of lower body balance that you need at that position. And players who didn't really do well in terms of the flexibility testing, we're just going to look at offensive linemen here. Jamarco Jones and Toby Weathersby from LSU. Those are guys that hit flexibility or balance scores that were just not that great in terms of potential long-term starting potential with both those guys. So just didn't really do well again in terms of any of those particular data points. Overall, though, this is all the data for the offensive linemen. I'm going to have a lot of things to talk about, obviously, until the NFL draft comes. But I just wanted to get this data out there for you guys to have at your leisure. If you have any questions about the data that I just presented today, or any individual player questions and that other kind of stuff, feel free to let me know in the comment section below. But this should just be a good way to give you an idea of the guys that put up red flags at the combine, because in many ways the combine is there to pick up red flags and to go back and watch the film on the guys that put up those red flags, so that you become a better evaluator and you do those other types of things. So I know that this might be kind of a negative Nancy kind of video because I'm not going over all the guys who had the best combine ever. I think you can figure out who had the best combine ever just by looking at the numbers yourself. But I do think, again, the combine needs to be a tool where you're able to look at the data and see, okay, these guys did not do that well in terms of these particular drills. We need to go back to the film and we need to see if our initial evaluation of those players was not exactly where it needs to be. So again, this is all the information today. All terms and definitions are in the description. And of course, my name is James Coburn. You can find my other work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Gymmetrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know. hit that notification button so that you're always reminded when another video of mine drops. And I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Peace!